Good afternoon to all in attendance and everyone watching Planet Underground's The Roundtable on the live stream. I'm Jimmy Wang with BizMetrics. This is the second year we're broadcasting from the Texas A11 Damage Prevention Summit live from Austin. The topic for this roundtable is communication between excavators and locators. I'm going to introduce the panelists, starting with the gentleman on my left in the foreground here. And then we're going to jump right in. So that is Craig Reed with radio detection, and then going clockwise, Dave Mulcahy with GPRS, then Greg Hernandez with One Gas, and Rudy Cabello with Ditch Witch. So as we're going through this, if anyone in the audience here in Austin have questions, please come and sit in the chairs on my left, just behind me, and then I'll get to you when there's a break. We're going to start off with what is the state of communications between excavators and locators in the damage prevention industry? Does anyone want to jump in and lead us off here?
Well, I guess if we're going to go with just a general, what is the state? It's in constant flux and partial turmoil and everything in between. I believe from what I've seen from our seat, there's a lot of times where really good communication is happening. And there are a lot of times where that great communication might fall through a gap somewhere along the way. So where the blame ends up shifting back and forth is always a fun chess match to figure out. But I don't think you can put a blanket statement on the entire industry saying it's bad. I think it's in flux. We see where it's worked really well. I know some instances that I look internally and I see where we're able to communicate details perfectly, provide detailed maps or detailed education of where these lines are. They're marked correctly, and then somehow, some way, that communication doesn't get to the guy that's on the bucket, and it still results in a damage. So perfect communication can still end up in damage some way, somehow. So tough to give a blanket statement, but that's kind of where I started off with.
Yeah, I totally agree, Dave. Yeah, because it's a little cyclical, with the industry, how much work, goes throughout the seasons, and there's the highs and the lows, and whenever there's a lot of work going on, a lot of, communication can get a little bit stressed and break down a little bit.
It can, and it does, and it starts when they call it one. They provide certain information or emails, and when they don't communicate the right phone number or they put the right contact person, that's when it starts breaking apart. And that's when damages incur. So I think it's a communication part that plays a major factor.
Yeah, I would say it's currently in a state of continuous improvement, right? To your point, you see instances where it's perfect and it goes flawless, and then you see those instances where those things fall through the cracks and then you have those damages. I think as we continue to try to aspire to get to a damage-free with many of our projects, that state of the communication between the excavator and the locator is going to have to be in continuous improvement.
Yeah, I kind of am of the mantra of over communication. Yep. There's no such thing. I'd rather put the information out there. That way, if did I send this email or did I tell so and so about this? It's always a better idea to go ahead and just communicate it out, even though it's third, fourth, or however many times, to keep everybody on the same page.
And sometimes the breakdown can be, yes, communication is happening, but is understanding happening? Right. And that's where we need to understand, especially excavators and locators. We don't always speak the exact same language, even though we feel we should be. Sure. So communicating and understanding back and forth and understanding one another doesn't always take place.
Yeah, you got a good point. Because even the industry lingo between companies, between municipalities or utilities, it can be, it'd be on one side of the spectrum versus the other. And if you have companies that are going there, there's a lot of our companies that are doing work all across the country, and that can, cause a little, their lingo back home might cause a little bit of miscommunication wherever they're doing work or wherever the work takes them.
Yeah.
So, Rudy, you mentioned emails. How do excavators and locators communicate? And is it emails, text, phone calls, and why isn't there a universal I guess, website or app that is used by everyone?
It's yeah, it's a little bit of everything. I think some of the guys are, email's a little antiquated. Unfortunately, it's kind of like sending a fax nowadays. So, I mean, when we want to communicate to each other, and everybody's busy, I'd much rather send a text really quick, just in case my colleagues are busy, and they might not be able to get back to me right then and there. But if they have a lull in their at that time, they might be able to send me a response really quick, whether that be just a quick yes or no question or just a clarification. So yeah, there's a lot of things. I think whenever communication is a little bit uncertain, or there is that the need to kind of clarify, nothing really kind of breaks it down and gets it down to the nitty gritty like a phone call. So whenever last minute, if there's something still not quite 100% clear, then that's whenever we still got to go back to the telephones and call everybody and make sure, all right, hell, did I get this information correctly? And that goes a long way.
On my side, when I get an email that one of our transmission lines gets located, the contractor sends an email out, so I send them an email to reconfirm it, and I call the number and I send them a text and I document it. That way, if they don't reach out to me to make arrangements to monitor the gas line, I have a text and I have a phone number and I have an email that I try to reach back out. But sometimes you call the office and it's the IT, he's got no idea what's going on. So they should, I think they should provide that, like the foreman on site phone number to improve on the communication.
And I would say from a communication standpoint, everybody's different, right? So an email may work for some people. Some people may prefer text. Some people may prefer a phone call. But I think he also asked, why isn't there some sort of universal app that does all the communication? And I don't think it's from a lack of effort. I think that there's many people out there right now that are trying to figure out a way to develop that type of technology to put it in place so that there are many channels of communication. But, it just boils down to, like, what is your preference? Some person may be better with text. Some person may be better with email. So, it just.
The question brings up really the communication gap that we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with a lot of locators, if we're going to put it in a general term, that are probably in their 20s, early 30s. They're via social media or text. A lot of things are done on the phone. And they might be dealing with the foreman on site that's got a flip phone and a pager. Right. So you need to be able to communicate in a lot of ways. I don't think you can have the silver bullet that's going to fix the problem. It's not going to happen, not in this industry. I think if you're getting into a different industry where you're talking about Google or tech, or you can kind of have a blanket. We're just so eclectic in this industry. We speak so many languages. So I really think you need to be able to be multifaceted there.
So CGA's new DIRT report shows that, quote, as often as 56% of the time, excavators cannot legally begin work on their planned start date in time. Do any of you do anything else in your business life or personal life where, I guess, the vendor or stakeholder is late 56% of the time? That seems high to me.
Outside of my wife?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not recorded, right?
Yeah. I'd say that if you think about it from a job performance standpoint, if you are failing at your job performance 56% of the time, the likelihood of you maintaining that job is very low. So, if you want to take it from that perspective.
It was funny. I go back to, I think it was the last summit we were talking on a roundtable, and we were talking about the ability of getting to tickets within a 48-hour, even 72-hour response, just depending on what state and what bylaws are out there. And I think I was sitting with a gentleman who said, we need to extend that. We need to make that longer. And I kind of pushed back and said, are you kidding me? We live in a society where everything's solved yesterday. Why are we not thinking about shortening this? Sure. Can we do that? Is there a way that we can do that through processes and finding ways to be more efficient as compared to saying, we don't have enough people?
On that 56%, I don't know where they got that rate from, but there's some tickets that are single address tickets or 100 feet, and then there's some contractors that I've seen called 20 miles that locates both sides of the road. And if you all know locating, you're not going to do that in 48 hours, not for 10 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles, especially if it's a project for sewer or water. So it depends also what they call it and what they ask for.
It's interesting you bring that up, right? So that's more back to the process that I was kind of alluding to. In my line of work on the private locating side, a contractor or an excavator is hiring us for a specific scope of work, and they're paying for us for our time doing that work. So it's amazing how efficient they get with the scope of work that they're qualifying. They know exactly the area that they want us to complete and work in, and because they want to pay the lowest amount possible. And now that they're able to have a free system, why not? Let's throw 20 miles out there. Can we build in processes that fix this? I'm not suggesting that we go out and we're charging for tickets, but is there something we can fix there with process and labeling out what you can and cannot do within the system to really boost efficiency and start lowering that number, that 56%, I believe it was the number you said.
56%.
Yeah.
So Dave brings up an interesting point, which is that 56%, let's assume that's correct. I mean, we don't have enough time to kind of debate and dive into that number, but let's assume that's correct. Is that an indictment of the system and process as we have right now, which, you know, is arguably from 35 years ago, or stakeholders? Is it the game, the rules of the game, or the players?
You just heard what I said. I think it's the rules of the game, because I think where so much efficiency can be picked up because the rules are so, I don't know, wide open. The players can take advantage of them. There isn't really that big penalty if you don't show up within the 48-hour or 72-hour response. So the slap on the wrist, move on. So maybe there is some systems that can be put, there's some more guidelines that can be put in place. And the players' regulations. But I really think it's the system, not so much the players. But I think both is probably the answer.
Yeah, I think you're right. A little bit from both sides. Need to kind of help improve upon the process, because nobody wants to do a couple mile long ticket, and it's really frustrating for everyone, the locators that have to go through and pick the ones out, and then the service the smaller daily tickets. So it really, I think there's something that I'm not sure what the answer is, but. I think efficiencies on both sides are definitely there.
So sticking with the topic of communications between locators and excavators, how much of that 56% in your, I guess, guesstimate do you think is due to poor or not good enough communications?
Well, we can get back to initial communication. I think that a large percentage is due to poor communication. I think that there's a large percentage of the major tickets, the overwhelming influx of tickets that might come in for a singular project or several projects where we'll just flood the system with tickets because we're going to be working out here for the next 6 months. So there's a large percentage of that. I wouldn't say that's communication at that point. Now, I think that if they could establish communication at the front end of a project, and we've talked about this in some best practices communications where we said, if an excavator or a contractor can communicate with the locating firm, this project's going to be going on in this phasing, there can be that upfront communication that could solve a lot of that problem. We understand there are a lot of tickets that are going to be flowing in, but this is the direction that we are planning on having them flow. Yep. And there could be some fix there with the communication, but just to say what was the reason for the 56%, I can't say it's just communication.
No.
There's some processes there.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's more so about the processes, right? If the processes are in place, I think that 56% goes down drastically. It's very difficult, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, it's very difficult to attribute that 56% specifically to communication. There's many other aspects of that could be contributing to that 56%.
On that 56% that we're talking about, when I was out in the field locating, I helped that percentage go extremely down because I actually built not just communication, but a relationship with the contractor. Mm-hmm. Once you build that relationship, they'll end up calling you, working with you, meeting on the field. Even if it's a 20-mile project, they'll give you GPS points, just mark this certain spot, and you save so much time.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
reduce damages and stay safe and whatnot, right? But I think in my part, I use that relationship with a contractor to help me be productive. Sure.
Yeah, and having that relationship between, the locate and the contractors, it's key because, they might, give you a heads up of, hey, actually, we got to push this back because this project that we're working on currently is delayed, or it really helps out the locator to say, okay, well, I don't have to get to that one because they're not going to get to it anyways because of whatever circumstance.
So I, I heard someone say we have many different methods of communication, right? We have email, text, phone calls, all that. Is that good or bad? Like, if I'm dealing with Amazon, I can't call in an order,
Yep.
right? And I can't text my Amazon delivery driver, right? I have to go to the website or use the app. So in terms of communications, are we maybe too flexible in terms of how we allow people to communicate with each other, which maybe introduces some chaos into the system?
I think it depends, right? I mean, it goes back to the point I was making earlier about what your preference from a communication standpoint. Me personally, one of the things that I just despise is if when I get to the point when I need to actually talk to somebody, I don't want to talk to an automated system. I don't want to be transferred to the text robot or anything. I want to talk to somebody. However, that's just my preference. That may not align with someone else's preference, but that's just me.
Hey, when I've got a problem with DirecTV, I'm just grinning and bearing that time to spend 45 minutes on the phone just trying to figure out what the heck's going on, right? And that's the exact point you make. Now, I think there's probably some chuckles out there when we were comparing the 811 system to Amazon. I would love to say that we can be in that space. Not saying it's out of the realm. I just don't see it in this current setting with the players that we've got, with the stakeholders we've got. I think we need to continue to have all these facets to pivot on.
So is the industry leveraging, kind of following up on some comments just now, but also a few minutes back, is the industry leveraging technology enough in general, but also specifically for communications? Or are we clinging on to like what we're comfortable with? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that everybody's always trying to get better, right? Everybody's trying to improve. I don't necessarily think that we're clinging on to the past for lack of a better term. I think that it's a continuous process in the fact that we're just trying to improve to make sure that the work that's being done out there is being done in a damage prevention method. And that process is just going to be with continuous improvement.
Again, you're going to go to both. You're going to see that there's a lot of instances where we are clinging on to this is the way we've always done it.
Right.
We've got a lot of early adopters that are trying out different things and trying to use different technology. I'll go to the front side of installation. In California, the state I'm from, there is the requirement to GIS everything that's installed. And that move away from we're going to provide as-built to the 811 system. Well, as-built should have been built. They're not where it was put in.
Right.
So, as a locator, I know that a lot of times you get out there and you've got your map. Okay, it's across the street.
Yep.
It's nowhere near where you're standing because the as-built were turned in, and we are not utilizing technology to get correct data into the system and utilize that. And that's right back to the excavator and communication with locators. If excavators are implementing that process into their process and turning that data over to the owner, then that's going to save the locator on the back end.
Yeah, there's definitely room for opportunity for some of the efficiencies, and there are some companies that they just already have their processes already set in place, and it's for some companies it's a little bit difficult to make some of those changes. But I think with the next generation coming up, there's more technology in everybody's hands, and a lot of the younger guys are more prone to kind of text or do the online or do ticketing systems through the website instead of just calling. And I think it's just going to get better and better. And slow, it's a slow progression, but we'll get there.
The new companies, the young companies are using all the new technology, and the senior companies like I said, they're sticking to their ways, the way they were taught, and they don't want change, I guess you could say.
Especially if it's working. Yeah,
If it's worked for
if
them for
it's
30
working
years,
for them,
we're still
why-
here, so why
exactly,
should we change it, right?
Exactly,
So
yeah.
If they have the old
it all
system.
depends on
then-
every individual's got different personality, so it depends who you're working with.
Just last week, I was at a client, an old mahogany inside building. There's a massive roll of plans, like, you can have that on your iPhone.
Yeah.
So, excuse me. So Dave brought up an interesting point, which is in response to the point about a ticket being 2 miles or 20 miles or whatever. And, to some extent, that's communications, right? So I'm communicating, I want this 2 miles marked because it's quote unquote free to me, right? What if, and I know there are legislative questions, but are there inefficiencies in how we communicate that right now because the economics are misaligned or not aligned, right? What if there's some minimal cost to the caller? Not the caller bears the entire cost, but some minimal cost that sends a message, we're trying to take waste out of the system. And if you bear 5%, 2% of a cost of this ticket, everyone's going to be more efficient. So I'm trying to frame that in terms of communicating efficiently. Any thoughts on that?
Well, previously I said I wasn't indicating that I wanted to charge for tickets, but maybe I am now. Since Jimmy said it, I'm all for it. Back to now the proactive communication has to come from the locator to solve the problem in this situation. I'm not saying that always happens. Any excavators, don't shoot arrows at me, please. But I do think, to your point, Jimmy, that there is a lack of communication, understanding guidelines, and I think that could be fixed by some restraint there. If all of a sudden you had to put some dollar bills forward to put in a bigger ticket or a mass quantity of tickets, there might be a little bit, you know what? Maybe I'll only put in 5 tickets today for 1,000 foot each, compared to I'll just put in a 20-mile ticket.
Might work, the 3, 5, or 7%, or maybe they'll go just don't call in the ticket and just go work. So
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
you got the
No.
50-50, because you do have those people that nah, just don't call it in.
We still have
We
people.
still have those people
We still have
doing
people
that.
that call in and they know all about the
They work.
A1 system, right?
Correct.
It's completely free. They know all about the system, and they just
Still.
don't call it in because they don't want it.
And it's free.
Now,
So if you think about it, locating is communicating to the caller / excavator / designer where facilities are underground. So the question is this, trying to stick to topic of communications. Is sending anywhere for 811 system, is sending anywhere from 1 to 6 or plus humans to every ticket the best way to communicate that? Is there to communicate where the facilities are underground, or is there a different way, or is there more than one way in 2023? I mean, that was the best way in 1985 or whatever, right? But is there a better way to communicate that these days?
So just so I'm clear, are you asking, is it more efficient to send multiple people to a tickets?
So let's say, let me give a great question. So let me give a hypothetical. Let's say there's a property and all the facilities were just laid, I'll give you an extreme example, laid last week, and I have centimeter accurate data of where everything is. And I can present that to the excavator or the designer right now. I'm communicating to the excavator / designer where everything is right now. Do we still need to send 1 to 6 or 1 to 8 humans and trucks out there? Is that still necessary to communicate where everything is in 2023?
I think if you feel comfortable in the information that you're getting as far as the accuracy, and you're saying that we're getting centimeter accuracy, I think if you're feeling comfortable in the information that you're getting, I think to your point earlier, you said if you build that relationship with the excavator, the necessity for you to send six to 7 people, or however many you said, 6 people out there, I don't think that's necessary. I think the tighter that we get with our data and information that we're actually providing to that excavator, and as long as it's accurate and trustworthy, I don't think we necessarily need to send that many people out there.
This is sounding like a lot like a one-to-one communication situation, right? So in that perfect world in a vacuum, we're talking about that one-to-one communication. There is maybe one or two utilities that we've got good, accurate data about, and that locator or that owner of that data can communicate that with the designer or the excavator. We're just not seeing that too much in the industry. We're seeing a lot of times one excavator is dealing with 7 or 8 different locators that have contracts with each of these, and each of the locators has no idea how accurate the data that they're currently holding on to is, because they don't know if they got as-built or good GIS data. Maybe some is very confident. Yes, I know, because I went out there last week and located, I even GIS'd it myself. I know that's accurate. So maybe they can communicate that back with a map and say, hey, this is where it is. If you're staying on this side of the street, I know what's on this side, you're good to go. Now, put a blanket statement across that. Yes, 2023, we should be in a place where you are using proper data. I just don't think we've got the pieces in the right spots right now.
Yeah.
So that question, to me, from what I know, my experience, maps help. It's a guideline. It can more or less where it's at. But the number 2 is hooking up directly, marking it out, and the number 1 to know where it's at. If when you hydrovac and you visually see it, that's the only number 1 guarantee you know where it's at.
Yep.
So the maps help, but I've always been told it's a guide.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Once we get all of these utilities mapped and down to the centimeter level, we'd be able to kind of share that information more freely to where whenever a customer is, white lined their job site, they'd be able to, just basically hydro excavate down to that utility instead of just open trenching, trying to figure out where those utilities may lay. And it'll just help kind of improve the efficiencies once we get to that point. I think we're slowly replacing some of those old utilities that have been in the ground for who knows how long. And moving forward, it's going to be a lot better for us as an industry, where we're going to be able to work much more efficiently because we're going to have that mapped information, and it's going to be a lot better for everyone in the long run.
I mean, not to be too punny here, but it might be a pipe dream, because at the point that you look at it, like by the time we locate and GIS all this, it's all changed already, right? Like by the time we've gone and caught up, they've already started changing all this stuff back here. So yeah, it's just like, I think it's going to be a constant keep up. And I'm old school, coming from that same mindset. I want to know there's paint on the ground. I want to know there's pothole. We've got daylight on it. Yes, that is the utility I located. That's what is going to prevent the damage.
So there are a lot of great conferences and summits like this one in Texas A11. And my recollection, I've been going to them for too many years. And my recollection is one of the key takeaways is always we need to communicate more. Right? I mean, for years, probably a couple of decades. Why is that always the key takeaway? I mean, and since that started, we got cell phones, we got laptops, we got texting, we got, everything. And that still seems to be one of the key takeaways or opportunities. What are the barriers what are the true barriers to better communications between the major stakeholders?
The question seems to imply that great communication isn't happening. And I guess I want to nip that and say, I think great communication is happening all over. I think a barrier that's causing communication as a breakdown and communication to be a hot topic all the time is the continuous stacking of the work that we've got going on. And it's always, we need more manpower. Well, new manpower means new people that maybe don't know the industry as well, don't know how to communicate. So you keep bringing in, you start figuring it out, to my point I was making, you start figuring it out, and then now you have to start anew. And that communication, whatever you figured out was the best practice, wasn't handed down. And now we've got more opportunities for miscommunication or poor communication to cause a lot of the incidents we're dealing with. So to get to the crux of it, what is the overall, I just think we need to continue to build on how the framework of how we can work within this space and what does good look like. So when someone steps into the space, into this world, that's established. Because it seems like it's a lot of, we know it because we've been around.
Yep.
All right.
So that's a great point, Dave. So I think we've beaten this communications horse to death. Let's move on to that about more headcount. It seems like we're chasing this headcount thing, where we need more headcount, we get to more headcount, oh, we still need even more headcount because construction activity continues to go up because we're building the country's infrastructure. So are we leveraging data and technology, truly leveraging data and technology enough in this industry? Or are we just kind of going to the old well of more headcount because that's the safe, that's like the old adage for some of us old guys here, no one ever got fired for buying IBM, right? No one ever got fired for throwing more headcount at it. And if that didn't work, well, I tried my best. So are we leveraging data and technology enough?
I would say yes, but I would say from just to kind of start back from where you said as far as adding more headcount, with the continuous turnover that you see in this industry, there's always going to be need for more headcount. You know, a lot of these locators and contractors come in at an entry level and they start making, you know, a certain amount, and then once they've got a certain level of experience, you know, they're on to the next job that's obviously paying a little bit more. So that requires more headcount. And as you get more headcount in, that requires more communication, that requires more training. So the technology, if we're using the technology, if we're using the technology in place to facilitate accurate and good training for that headcount as it comes in, yes. But I think the headcount situation will always be an issue because you always have turnover. One thing that I've learned in the brief time that I've been in this industry is that many of these contractors, they have consistent turnover. It's just consistent.
I think we've utilized technology pretty well. I think we can continue to look at the ways of using technology to be more efficient. But I really want to go back to what I mentioned previously about the processes and being able to build efficiencies into what we're currently mentioning. My example from earlier, when we're hired, they know exactly the scope and they're very specific about it, and we can be very efficient on that project. Now, can we build that efficiency in with this communication between excavators and locators? Can we build in a more efficient model that allows for not needing more headcount in our current environment? So to where now a locator can be far more efficient, we can get a lot more done within a space. And I know this might be faux pas in the world, but maybe lower the amount of tickets. By building that efficiency, we can lower the amount of tickets that are flowing in to a system and make that more manageable. So now a locator can focus on their 15, 20 tickets in a day and do them really well.
Exactly.
Compared to getting bombarded with 40, 45 tickets because there's a lot of inefficiencies in the process of the way you put in the tickets.
That ticket overload, you said 40, 45 tickets, that usually happens in the summer. Contractors are all going at it, and then come fall, ticket numbers go down, and the locating companies start cutting hours, and the locators can stick around. So
Yep.
the headcount varies.
Absolutely.
You got to try to figure out the workload.
Yeah, there's a really big balancing act between the workload and, you know, headcount. And, you know, once those tickets start to drop off, you know, in fall, then it's, you know, everybody wants to be efficient, and of course headcount then also becomes a problem the other way.
Exactly.
And then, you know, it's just a never-ending cycle. So it's, I mean, there's always, you know, room for improvement. But yeah, I think, you know, just like you mentioned, whenever there is a good locator out there, I mean, there are some companies that will definitely poach them and say, all right, hey, here's this X amount of dollars more.
So guilty.
and we're going to lower those tickets from 45 to maybe 20. So, yeah.
Right. I mean, Dave, again, brings up a good point, which is, I guess my question is this, do you guys do anything else in your daily jobs or request any service or product where it's free?
Google?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah. No.
Right.
It's not
free.
There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? I mean, someone's paying for it.
Right. It's what you're seeing ads. You're seeing. I mean, it's like quote unquote free TV. You can get TV over the air. It's free. but you're seeing the ads, right? So isn't that, and I understand that's not Texas 811 or any one calls, it's legislative, but isn't that a key? Because anything that's free, and this is not deep thoughts for me, this is kind of academic study, anything that's free, people tend to use more than what they need. Right, and it's kind of unconstrained, right? It's free. I might dig next week, so I'm calling it 5 tickets this week just in case. Is that an opportunity? Again, some nominal fee that just says, hey, are you really using this? I mean, $1 or $2.
You gotta be careful though, like, because what Greg was saying earlier, you have to be careful because once you start assessing prices to those tickets, then you get people to say, hey, you know what, that's fine, I'll just do it myself, and that could bring up a whole nother set of issues. So you just gotta be really, really careful with that.
Yeah, you're trying to, what was the line I heard on the TV? You're trying to solve a 30-pound, or a 1-pound problem with a 30-pound solution, or, it's interesting because 811 has always been about how can we maximize the amount of tickets that are flowing in. We want to get more marketing campaigns out there to get more people that are aware, that understand how to use the system, understand that it is a free system, that when they're digging, they will call. And if you switch it too dramatically, by making it a cost, do all of them go away and say, you know, I'm not calling in any tickets now because I'm not putting my money forward. Right. But again, we're trying to solve a problem with front-end communication. So a lot of different ideas might be flowing out there, right? So it's scary to think about, right? Because you don't want all of a sudden them saying, I'm going wild, wild west here.
Yep. I mean, if there was a way to maybe limit it to how many tickets that, you know, you could call in, and then that still has its own set of issues in itself. But, you know, it's one of those situations where chicken and egg, right? You don't necessarily know what the ramifications will be positively or negatively if you start assigning fees to those tickets.
All those calls regulated when they call 811. Like I can call and I get your address, say I want you to locate the front of my property. I'm gonna build a brand new driveway. I want extra paint, extra flags. Your front yard will be painted, but nobody knows it's me that called. And your yard's gonna be all painted orange, yellow, red, and green. You know, so who regulates the calls? Depending if it's 1,000 feet or 10,000 feet or 2 miles, you know.
It's an interesting prank. I haven't thought about that. You might be onto something there, Greg.
All this time, the toilet paper.
So Craig brought up an interesting point. Like, let's say we have a county and a state, and the locates in that county are, let's say, 10 days late, right? 10 days late. And I understand the legislative aspects of it, but let's ignore that for now. But the tickets in the county are 10 days late. What's the point in a one call just taking in more tickets that are due in 48 hours?
It's a great point. I think there's really no point. If you're 10 days late,
If you're 10 days late,
no contractor's
they need
waiting
to look
for
at the
that.
contractor doing those locates.
Yeah.
There's no, it's extreme 10 days.
No, that's,
I mean,
if
5
you're a
days.
couple of hours a day late, and you better communicate, or you should have communicated with the contractor, but it should be a day or two late at most,
yeah.
not 10 days.
Yeah.
I'd say me on the private locating side, thank you for the work.
Right?
So right now we have this spigot that is totally disconnected from how much water the pot can hold, right? Okay, do we have any questions from the audience here? So let's talk about like the ticket flow and stuff. The ticket, maybe some way to constrain tickets when the system's over capacity, right? What other things might we be able to do with that? And it's not so much to discourage people, but it's like, aren't we giving them false hope, right? It's a county where the tickets are all 5 days late, and say, yeah, come on, submit your tickets. It's due in 48 hours. Right? Are there any other potential solutions we can think of for that? Again, leaving legislative constraints aside for now.
Yeah, because if I'm an excavator in that situation, then I'm going to start just calling it everything as an emergency. That way someone comes out, right? I mean, there's a lot of little loopholes that you can see in there. The constraining of tickets is an interesting thing, because Craig, you kind of brought it up or hinted on it, and I was trying to think, well, there's only, if we did some analysis on how much linear footage can an open trench company do, an open trench crew do. Mm-hmm. So you should be limited to being able to call that much in per day. Or a horizontal drilling company, how much could you do? And I feel like there can be some front-end analytics that are done. So we're not calling in these 20-mile tickets because we know they can't do that in a week. It can't be done. So there might be something there where we can have some front-end analysis and constrain those tickets and allow for more efficiency there to say, hey, I understand you've got 2 crews that do open trench. The maximum you would ever be able to do is X. So you can call in this many tickets for this much footage, and that would eliminate a lot of that excess.
That's an interesting idea. So what about if, I'm just throwing it out again, leaving the legislative constraints aside, if, and I think Greg brought this up, is if there's an area where the locates are really late, maybe the excavator has to start locating, right? Just kind of overflow work. Can that be worked into the system somehow? Again, ignoring legislative legal issues right now. And I think that's being done in some areas, right? I hear about it like, yeah, they're so behind, I had to locate myself, or I had to hire a private locating company or something like that.
Yeah, you were going to get another shameless plug from me, right? Yeah. Because that's exactly what we've seen. We've seen late tickets or behind on something turn into, hey, I just got to hire myself. Either they take on and train somebody and try to do their own locating, or a lot of times they don't want to take on that liability, so they look into hiring a private locator to get them by. Obviously, that has success, but that doesn't help solve the ultimate problem of living within the 811 system and solving that. We want the 811 system to work in its capacity and not have public locates being located by private locators. Right.
And I don't think you can really answer that question with taking the legislative part out of it, because it's like the elephant in the room, right? Once you have someone who's not trained, or if you have an excavator out there locating, is not trained, not necessarily knowing what they're doing, marks could be wrong. This is how this starts leading to damages, and I just think that's the elephant in the room, and it's really hard to answer that question without taking that legislative component, because it's there, right? It's right there.
Yeah, we definitely want to have.
It's a law.
Yeah.
I mean, 811 is a good system. It's not perfect, but we definitely want to encourage everybody to use it and go through the processes that are there.
Yeah.
What I would do to control that, if it's a 10-day ticket and I have my gas lines in conflict,
Yeah.
I would personally go out there and meet the contractor or go to the company. Like, okay, where are you starting? What are you doing? And I call the locating company. Like, I'm going to guide you, help you, and stay in front of my utilities. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then you still have communications and electric and water and sewer and everything else out there.
I kind of like what Jimmy was getting to, though. Is there a way to do this within the 811 system? If they know, hey, we're behind, and we know you've got it to work, is there a way, if you do decide to do your own locating or hire a private locator or go another route, we can release the data that we have, the as-built data that we have, and allow you to still get your job done because we know we're behind, and still stay within that 811 program, but maybe you're not getting the locators just because they're overwhelmed. Is that a possibility? Is there the data sharing that could happen to allow good locates to still take place, because now we're getting data up front?
Yeah, I think there is a way for that to happen, right? You give the I guess the customer the option. Hey, how soon are you trying to get this project done? These are our current constraints right now. We are 2 weeks behind. If you're able to wait 2 weeks, then great, we'll be able to get you taken care of. But if you aren't able to wait 2 weeks, we have that data. If you want to use a private locate, we can share that data with the private locator, and you can get that stuff done sooner than those 2 weeks. So I think there is a way to do it.
Yeah, interesting thought. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
So in the latest DIRT report, again, the single biggest cause of damages was invalid, insufficient notification practices. So call it no ticket. And for years, the industry thought that was because people were not aware of 811. Okay. And a couple of states, I think North Carolina, Indiana, did some deep dive into studying people who had damages without a ticket, and really, why did they not call in ticket? And I didn't know about the 811 system was not the top reason. It was a small, very small reason. So could these people, persistent number of people not calling in tickets, could those be related to the 56% of tickets that are late, right? Like, I'm supposed to participate in the system, but you're late more than half the time. I cannot wait. I mean, are those two related? The 56%, does that weaken the integrity of the system?
It's interesting that you put it that way, because it was nice to get that data out of the committee meetings in the Gulf Shores, where they dug even deeper and said that I believe it was 77% of those that no calls, they were landscapers. And landscapers we're putting in our drip lines, we're putting in our irrigation pipes, we're putting in our sprinklers. Yeah, they're still digging down to 12, 16, 18 inches. So they're still very liable to hit utilities. They're putting in a plant and they're digging a hole. But typically they want to get that job done today. They're not waiting 2 days. We're trenching, we're going, we're on this project, we're off this project. So to that point, that 56% could be a big reason why 48 hours, 72 hours just ain't going to work for landscapers. That's a big chunk of that data.
Yeah.
Well, and the 48 to 72 hours is if it's actually on time,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
The 56% don't even get it done by then.
But that's why they're not calling in, right? Even 48, 72 hours, we're not calling in. We know about the system, but we're going to be on and off this project today.
Yeah.
So why call it in for 2 or 3 days? Even if they're on time, I'm not calling that in.
Or a lot of people just say, it's my property, go ahead and dig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they
Yeah.
said, it's my property. They start digging.
Does anyone on this panel believe that, does anyone on this panel believe that there are still a lot of professional excavators who don't know about 811 or that they need to call in?
Well, if they don't, they're in the wrong industry.
No, I do not believe
Yeah.
there's a lot or many at all.
Yeah.
Professional excavators that don't know about 811.
So do we agree that they're not calling in for other reasons? It's not that they don't know that, okay. So what about, how much time do we have left? I'm sorry. Okay, last question. Last question. This 48, 72-hour due date and time, if you think about how society has changed, that's probably reasonable within societal expectations in the 80s and the late 80s. But now when I can order something from Amazon Prime now and have it be here by 5 p.m.,
Right.
is that kind of antiquated and too rigid? And if we think about it, if someone says, okay, I got 25 guys on site, I didn't call in a ticket, it's on me, my bad, but I'll pay $1,000. I mean, they're probably calling Dave, but I'll pay $1,000. No, I mean, but that's outside the system. I'll pay $1,000 for the system, for some mechanism in the system to come out and locate this.
Wow.
Why are they not able to do that right now?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting that the point is brought up, because I got the chance to sit with a client yesterday that had this exact thing. Major plumbing contractor in San Antonio. And he was saying, when I'm on a site and there's something leaking, there's something spewing, we're going to be there tonight or tomorrow morning to fix it, whether someone's there to locate before or not. Mm-hmm. So, and the ball was thrown to me, can you make sure that you're there to make it? And we said, absolutely, we're going to make it work for you. We're not in a pliable position in the 811 system, right? We're in a pretty rigid system. We've got our boundaries. And I love the question that's posed by Jimmy here, because it's shaking the root of the system. And I think the apples are starting to fall around us here, because when you start saying, hey, we're going to take 48 and 72, we're going to make it 24, or we're going to make it 12.
Right.
And that's going to be standard. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are stooping in their seats a little bit. So I love it. Me personally.
And I know there's 811's got the emergency ticket, which is 4 hours, right, to respond.
Yeah.
But some contractors, like if it's an emergency, life-threatening, they have to be there, they gotta do their work right there and then, so some people don't even wait the 4 hours. So, it's an iffy question, depends on the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know some contractors that they definitely, if they can get their tickets and everything marked on time, I can see them, paying the premium to get everything taken care of, because that just lets them move on to the next project. Because, I mean, unfortunately, it comes down to getting the job done and getting paid at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And whenever those tickets don't come in, and it slows them down, and then it slows everything else down that's already in progress.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I think we have to stop this here. Can we get a hand for our panelists here?
Thank you very much.
So for those watching on the live stream, we're going to be back in a few minutes at 3 p.m. Central Time. 3 to 3:05. 5.
Thank you, guys.
I certainly can't disagree with you, and I don't even have an idea of what would start the ball rolling on fundamental change. So it serves the customers better. Interests are aligned. All stakeholder interests are aligned. I mean, I guess I have some stuff that's, some ideas that are just unvetted, but that's what we're here for. I mean, conversations, doesn't have to mean the thing's going to happen to talk about, hey, what if we did this? What would happen? But, with anything related to damage prevention over the years, the one time when all of a sudden people are moving around faster and there's sweat on their brow and just the energy is way more apparent is when something bad happens.
Yeah.
Short of that, not a lot of, I guess, energy in damage prevention. So, what would have to happen? To what scale would something have to happen? Oh, by the way, I want you to talk about regulatory. I just talked to a guy that used to work for PHMSA, and his view on the basic knowledge level at PHMSA for damage prevention, locating, et cetera, he estimated as being extremely low. I found that interesting, that you would have an insider say something about the organization like that. So I don't think any of us were thinking that somebody in the regulatory industry was going to be knighted and say, this is silly, we're going to do something different, and everybody's going to follow suit, But it kind of takes me back to an earlier conversation that we had where I said, a lot of people think they know locating, but in reality, there's not many people that really know it and understand, the full scope of what is possible, and conversely, what is not possible. It understands the whole universe there. But let's not backtrack. Let's take this thing and let's say, all right, what sort of incident, what scope of incident would all of a sudden likely create change in the business? What would it have to take?
It would have to take some just egregiously catastrophic incident. So if you think about it this way, a couple years ago, I looked at how many fatalities a year, these are horrible, right? But I looked at how many fatalities a year are there in the US caused by bad damage prevention.
Okay.
Right. And I think it was I looked at the previous 5 or 6 years. I went to the PHMSA database. I looked at various sources. And if I recall, it was less than 5 a year.
Okay.
It's still too many, right? But less than 5 a year. How many construction workers are there in the US?
I don't know. Are there 1 million?
I think there's over 1 million
okay.
when I
All
looked.
right.
Okay. So 5 out of 1 million. Again, I'm not justifying the 5. I'm saying 5 out of 1 million. The stat they use for fatalities on the job, and same thing with murders, is how many per year per 100,000?
Okay.
So 5 per million is like 0.5 per 100,000.
Right.
Okay. The fatality rate for delivery drivers in the US, if I recall, is something like 20 to 25 per 100,000.
Okay.
Okay. So my point is, given all the inefficiencies and antiquated kind of rules and expectations we have in this industry, we're at a point now where, in the eyes of many people, for better or for worse, it's safe enough.
Right.
So I think that's also why there's not like a tremendous push for quantum leap improvements.
Right.
So it's safe enough. So we're going to go around, little duct tape here, little zip tie here, and hey, we're getting better.
Right. Well, let me talk about an incident that occurred in 1968 in Richmond, Indiana. 40 people
That was before
died.
my time, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I get that.
Maybe not before your time.
Yeah. Right. Well, this was a gas leak, and one of the stores that in the basements. This is in a downtown area. There's a plaque you can see in downtown Richmond today about the 68 explosion. But in one of the nearby basements where gas was leaking into, somebody was storing a bunch of dynamite. So it's a huge explosion, wiped out a good number of buildings. Property damage was nuts, and 40 fatalities. And I said at the federal level, some things changed in 1968 for natural gas. It was a direct result of that incident. So it took that to put in the 1968 rules. And it wasn't like there was no safety requirements before, but all of a sudden now, it's a big deal. And then for liquids, I think it might have been 72. Don't quote me on that.
So you're no longer allowed to store dynamite in your basement? Is that?
Well, yeah, just because there's a law against it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? But the fact is that a catastrophic event has a minuscule chance of occurring, but that's not zero. It could occur. And our definition of catastrophe could be like some huge redundant fiber system has two things happen to it that aren't related at the same time. This has happened before, and all of a sudden half the country, misses 18 minutes of the Super Bowl.
That would be catastrophic.
That would be catastrophic, right? But yeah, I just remember one, we do, and I agree with the 5 per year on average. We've been doing Digging Dangerous for so long. You want to try to not, we still miss stuff, but you'd think you're generally aware of instances related to damage prevention where people have passed away. And again, you're right. It's not this huge number, but unfortunate for the incidents to occur, but it's not happening all the time. So, but I just remember Northwest Airlines in Minneapolis, St. Paul, having to shut down their entire operations because the redundancy of telecommunications there for one part, for some X number of blocks, the two cables were in the same duct bank. Yeah. And so when that duct bank was struck, they lost everything.
I remember that incident.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. When you mow your lawn, do you wear safety goggles?
Nope.
Okay. I don't either. Okay, I'm not picking on you. I don't either. But you're supposed to. Okay. And the reason is you have blades, it's spinning, and if something, maybe a locating flag, goes in, it could fly out and you could get blinded. So if you look, they recommend you wear safety goggles when you mow your lawn. And yet we don't. Okay, so my point is that safety is not an infinite thing, right? We don't, throughout our daily lives and even when we work, we don't go all out on safety. So I think what we have to do more with this system, this overall fairly adequate system we have, is look at ways we can make it more convenient for people.
Or lower other kind of costs that are outside of safety.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we don't wear safety goggles. Yes, yet it's pretty convenient. I could wear safety goggles, but I don't like wearing it because I got scratches and stuff on it, whatever. But if it's more convenient, I might wear it. But another example I'll give is about 40,000 Americans die every year in traffic accidents. Okay. Do you wear a motorcycle helmet when you drive your car?
No.
That sounds crazy, right?
Yeah.
If you did, people would stare at you
Yeah.
like, what's he doing? What's
Yeah.
this guy doing? Is he a race car driver? But 40,000, if you think about it, I don't know what the studies say, but I would bet if everyone wore safety helmets, like motorcycle helmets, while they're driving their cars, that 40,000 number would go down. Would go down by at least 1%, at least 400 people. It'd save 400 lives. It'd save one life a day, probably. Probably a lot more. But we don't do that. I have a motorcycle helmet. We don't do that. So there's some aspect of safety. It's not like, this makes it safer, so you have to do it. If you don't do it, you're an unsafe person, right? And I think we do, in this industry, in this space, we do that too often. And we do it because it's our profession. So we look at it as this is the most important thing, which is fine. Those are noble thoughts.
Right.
But the reality is that's not the way humans think. So I think we have to look at our system. And for example, the number one cause is not calling in tickets, right? We spend a lot of time and effort, and we need to do it to single that out. No tickets, insufficient request. But we don't spend enough time asking why, finding out why, right? I'm not wearing my goggles while I'm mowing my lawn. Okay, but why? And I think we need to get at questions like that, like why did this person not call in ticket, right? And then in Six Sigma, they have 5 whys. You have to ask why 5 times to get at the true root cause.
Okay.
Right. And then I think we have to ask why again, and then get at real root cause. Why is this happening? Instead of just saying, hey, they didn't call in the tickets, and if they had just called it in, this damage wouldn't have happened.
Right. Right.
It's easy to say,
Right.
right? But we don't follow that mentality in the rest of our lives.
And so why would we expect to follow it here?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We could, because we are directly in this business, but of the million excavators out there, of the million people working construction out there, they're doing, they're out in the field every day, 40, 50 hours a week. They're more like, are mowing the lawn or are driving the car without the motorcycle helmet. And then if we want to go after that fruit, we have to ask ourselves, how can we help? If we really want to go after that fruit, I'm just being honest, we have to ask ourselves, how can we help others get to that fruit easier?
Sure.
And not just say you're delinquent because you didn't go after that fruit.
Right. Right.
More locating, but we need smarter locating, right? More differentiated, more segmented locating.
So what percentage of one call locating effort, and when I say effort, not driving, in-field effort, let's say 10% of a locator's time is actually using the instrument, putting down paint and flags. Let's say 10% of his day. So 8-hour day, 10%.
Hour and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, 1.25, whatever that is. Okay. So now all of a sudden, you say out of that time that you're actually spending locating, okay, that's all we're looking at, all right? How much of what you do never does anything for anybody? Is a complete waste of energy.
Yeah. So some of that are trade secrets that I can't talk specifically about, but it's a very high percent. It's a very high percent that I'm not actually using the instrument to find facilities that are highly likely to be in conflict with the dig area.
Yeah.
So I want to be very specific about that.
Yeah.
Right. I think a very high percent of the time I'm not actually doing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think we should be, and we could even narrow it down even more. Maybe have the locators spend a higher percent of the time locating high high consequence tickets that are highly likely to be in conflict with the dig area.
Right.
So what that means then, if that's the set, what's outside that set are the tickets that are not likely to be in the dig area, the tickets that are not likely to be damaged, in the dig area. The tickets that are, even if they're damaged, we don't like damages, but we need to be smart about this. Even if they're damaged, are not likely to be high consequence. Okay, and we're not even saying necessarily. I'm not even saying necessarily remove locating, but have the locators concentrate on that set, right? And just be smarter about it, as opposed to pretending it's all equal.
How can they focus on that set without direct, I'll call it even supervision by the excavator or the design company or those
Right.
who actually know
Good question.
what is valuable and what isn't?
Right, it's a good question because I'm not accountable to. If I'm a locator, I'm not accountable to them right now, to be honest, right? Because they don't pay me, and they don't have direct say over whether I remain hired or fired.
Right.
Right. So I'll be honest. Like if I'm working on the job and you're not paying me and you don't have control over whether I keep this contract, talk to the hand.
Yeah.
It's like, I just don't care.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to come back at it again, this time my math being correct. So 480 minutes in an 8-hour day, 10% of that is 48 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we could argue, in a rural area where your towns of 10,000 people or less are 5 to 10 miles apart, 48 minutes a day of actually putting down, in an 8-hour day, putting down paint flags, maybe just about right, Obviously, a more congested area, you don't have to drive as much, that percentage is going to go up. But let's use that 48 minutes. And so let's suppose for a second that right now, half that time is wasted. 24 minutes does nothing for anybody, because they're marking to the extent of a ticket where the excavator or the ticket caller has no earthly means of ever going or any desire to go to the full extent. Just did it because of convenience or kind of CYA to make sure I got, more than what I need, whatever it is. You've already said, you have top secret information that it's high. So let's use half of 48 minutes, 24. Okay. So with 24 minutes wasted, how much did I have to have in terms of fuel and labor and vehicle maintenance and IT support to drive all that 24 wasted minutes?
Yeah.
We've already determined that, that person and everything that goes in that person is the highest cost of providing locating. If you're in the locating business, getting contracts with utilities, that by far, the person in that truck and whatever it takes to support that person, that's the biggest chunk. And now we've just said that, getting them around for 24 minutes of his day is completely waste because nobody's using that information. We've also said, that the only way somebody could get a full 48 minutes of information that people would use is if that person who called in that ticket, that person who knew why, what they were doing, etc., could be almost a direct supervisor of the locator and say, don't worry about that over here, do this here, do this. Oh, come back tomorrow and do this, and then at noon, I need to pull you over to the other side of the town. Now, all of a sudden, can we assume that none of what that person is doing is wasted? Now, granted, maybe not every mark is dug upon, but maybe a decision is made based on where the marks are about what I'm going to do. So those marks provided value. They gave me or us information that we needed to make a decision.
I don't know if all of it would go away. I don't know if all of the waste would go away, but I think a lot of it would. So if you think about the dynamic between the locator and the excavator, there are a lot of misaligned interests. So from the excavator's part, I remember a very high, I forgot the exact percent, but just an unreasonably percent of the tickets have what they call the description of work, mark entire property.
Right.
Okay. extent of work, whatever the phrase is, mark entire property. And then, you read the work, it's like, yeah, we're planting trees on this northwest corner. Well, why are we marking entire property? Well, because that was the easiest thing for me to enter. And just in case, okay, if you were paying someone to locate, right? If you, Mike Paralak, were paying someone to locate, and you were just planting trees in the northwest corner, would you say, give me a quote on locating entire property?
Yeah.
You would just
Locate anything here on this northwest corner
right.
of my property.
It's right. This part of
Confirm or deny the presence of
right.
underground
Exactly.
utilities.
You wouldn't say like, hey, this part of Earth. Just locate that whole part of Earth.
Right.
Right. You'd say no. Northwest corner. I need 10 feet by 10 feet.
Right.
That's it. Okay. And just give me a quote for that. So the excavator. And to be put it blunt, like they just don't care about the productivity or waste of the locator because it's free for them.
Yeah.
It's free. Okay. But on the other hand, the locator's like, look, I'm just going to make sure I have no at-fault damages. Okay. I don't. Again, to be brutally honest, I don't care if you have this catastrophic damage that's not at fault because that's by definition not my fault.
Right.
So you have this misalignment of interest, and from that you have a lot of waste, right? Because mark entire property, right? And the locator's like, okay, I just got to get this done as quickly as I can, and just make sure it's not, I don't have any at-fault damages, right? It's because the entity that pays the locator is not the excavator, right? I think a lot of the waste.
Good afternoon to all in attendance and everyone watching Planet Underground's The Roundtable on the live stream. I'm Jimmy Wang with BizMetrics. This is the second year we're broadcasting from Texas A11 Damage Prevention Summit, live from beautiful Austin/Georgetown. The topic for this roundtable is data analysis and data sharing. First, I want to introduce our fine panelists. Let's start with the gentleman on my left, nearest to me. This is Forrest Sim with Enhanced Scanning. Then to his left, going around clockwise, is Shane Hart with Computers, and Adam Junker with GPRS, and then Itzik Malka with 4M Analytics. If any audience members here in the live audience have questions, please sit in the chairs to my left, and I will call upon you when there's a break. So let's jump right in. Data analytics and data sharing. How is the industry doing with data analytics and data sharing, in your opinion? Anyone feel free to start us off here.
Yeah, I can start us off. It seems to be at a little bit of a crossroads. With the increased ability to capture data. We all seem to have. I think I was at the Louisville Utility Expo, and there's about 10 or 12 different mapping applications, and you didn't see that five years ago, right? So the ease of collecting the data has really brought up the kind of questions now about who owns the data, how do we use it. Now every time you have a ticket management contract, they talk, well, what about the data? It seems to be a big question. So we're at a little bit of a crossroads where like the 811 centers, some of them have polygons, and sometimes we want more details, and you have a lot of people such as yourselves, collecting. I think all three of you guys are data collectors, right? And you guys are collecting that data in the field, and it's a little bit more accurate and also tells some stories. So we're a little bit of crossroads about all this data out there and how do we use all this in a collaborative approach to kind of tackle this 50 and 5. So I think we're at a crossroads for sure. And I think, as we work together, things like this, we'll find out to kind of how to use it.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm traditionally a truck guy, right? Drive a lot of trucks, and I rented a car in Detroit Airport, and it was a brand new BMW. And I'm like, man, this thing is sweet. But I'm kind of embarrassed to say it took me about 5 to 7 minutes to figure out how to turn this thing on, right? And I think we're kind of in that stage right now where it's like there are so many technologies that's easy to collect data, whether it's ticketing data, damage data, utility location data, and we're collecting it. But now it's to the second part of the question: how are we sharing it? How are we using it? How are we leveraging that information to reduce damages? And I think that's where the industry's at right now, trying to figure out what is the best course of action. And it's a grab right now for everyone trying to solve that problem.
It's really interesting because when I first came into the underground locating space, I mean, I came in as a private locator, and this was not the data was not something that I heard people talking about. It was simply you just go out and do the job, and this conversation about the data and about how important it is and what data is important, what data is superfluous. That seems, in my experience, that's something that I'm hearing people talk more and more about, exponentially more about, in the last handful of years. And before that, it almost just took off from zero. That may not be everybody's experience, but that's been my experience, is that it was hardly at all talked about, and now it's a very big point. And I see the value in data for sure, but as one who has suffered many times from analysis paralysis, I just wonder, like, are we just filling ourselves with so much data that it kind of becomes overwhelming? And I personally feel a sense that there's something surely that we could do with all this data, and I try to take advantage of some aspects of it, but I don't have time to figure out how to analyze all the data. I hope that somebody does, but I don't have the time for all that.
Yeah, I think, from the beginning, the risk mitigation system that we are having today, that have been designed in the 60s, 70s, 80s as a last-minute urgent systems, exist because the lack of data and the lack of shareability. And I think the technology wasn't ready there. But I think today, when you see the biggest companies in the world, like Amazon, like Google, Facebook, those companies create data every day. And if you look at construction and constructability, connecting the states of what we could design to the actual what we could build or install, I would say that capturing the stages, multiple parties involved, bunch of handovers, bunch of productions of data, deliverables like blueprints, GeoServer, imagery, and all kinds. It could be CAD, it could be microstations, and eventually nobody is capturing that data. And if you go to the reasons, if you read to the DIRT report and also to the CGA data that comes, you're going to find that the system is lacking of data, is dealing with repeat work and redundant processes, and that data could be the X factor that could change everything, because if people will be able to use the same data that you just produced as a locating company, you go out there as for your reasons, it could be liability, it could be anything, but you are taking pictures of the lines. But what do you do with it? If you go out there and you have like all kind of systems, that geophysical tools that you are using, and they have the ability to be monitored, but you are not using the data, what does it mean? And people will go to do the same activities and expecting different results. I think that's the definition of insanity. Those insanities, that's the one that data could solve. And I think data, it needs to be, it's like crude. It needs to be broken down to pieces and analyzed, because you are familiar with data in, garbage in, and garbage out. To be able to deal with data, especially data that needs to be geotagged in the space, that I think that required expertise. But we could see the physical above ground world with Google Maps. We could navigate with augmented reality. We could do anything with Pokemon Go even. We could just trace anything. But to be able to capture the data and reuse the data, I think that's the key element. That's the starting point of everything.
We definitely get some, legacy issues in this industry that keep us behind the curve on what's happening in other industries. Just, looking back, I've been here for about just over 10 years. this industry is in. At first, it was utilities that prioritized, hey, GPSing their data and having a good GIS set. And they'd have locate companies that are like, okay, we'll just use that. And now we see locate companies that, hey, I want to collect this data and I'll store this data. And I think the next point we'll get to when it gets easier is that the excavators will want to keep their own utilities map. And then we'll need some sort of blockchain to keep all those in, kind of on the same kind of ledger, as well as, say, the 811. So that with the pictures that we're looking at, I mean, we're not there, we're behind the curve on other things, but that's really what's happening. A lot of the mapping data and Fragment, I think I was reading some of the excavation or the recommendations from the DIRT report. And standardizing the data to be able to do this stuff, we still have a lot of work ahead of us, but it's been interesting to see, because data, for us as a software company and ticket management, data is always important, right? Even if it was a text or a string or a little number here, it's been important since the 70s. A lot of big new apps you see sometimes, they've been around a while. They've just kind of hit a market stride or done some things with those data engines. And now the GPS data, it's like the 4D of the data. Now we're adding the spatial data to all this other data, and we're just getting us to that other picture. So it's important, and everyone would prioritize, like even excavators, they want to make sure they have their billing data. They want to make sure they're doing the job in the right place and all that stuff. And there's lots of benefits to that because it makes their company successful. But there is benefits to everyone having some mapping data, whether it's your users in the field or the pipelines you're working around, or even a danger or alert from something that's physically out in the world, so that people can get that information quick. And I think I heard Jimmy asked a question in the previous one, what if you didn't have the 48 hours and 72 hours? And this kind of puts people in a tough spot where sometimes you need data quick. And we all want to use it, and we all want to have good data. So there's definitely a lot of steps for us to continue to go. I think it's exciting times for people. You get companies that put a little pressure on the 811s to kind of improve. You have some different call center softwares that are doing different things with data. You have a lot of mapping applications there. So it's just interesting to see that. And as we go, and then we all kind of get different pictures. I was just going to add looking at Chicago, a lot of cities do collaboration, like UCCs. They'll have utility coordination committees. And in the story of Chicago, where they've mentioned that they've reduced their damages by 50% since 2017, it's the Chicago call center, not necessarily the state call center. And at a state level, it's always really hard to get everyone and have everyone fall under the same thing. I mean, we won't get into politics and stuff too, but that's hard to manage a full state. And you see some more success sometimes in cities that take that UCC movement because it's so dense, they have so much infrastructure, it's important for them to coordinate it all, and they're forced to do the data. It might take a little bit extra time, but as that's getting easier, people need to start looking and make sure that they're having their data piece and what they want internally as well.
Right, and that was mainly contributed to 4 different areas, right? So they share that mapping information during the planning stages. They do investigations during the design stages. This is all, to your point, and your point, it's reactive. We would get a call, can you come out and find this gas line so we don't hit it tomorrow when we're sticking a bucket in the ground? They're way out in front saying, hey, we're thinking about these utilities 6 months to a year before the contract.
They don't want to put in a bad spot either. They're like, hey, go here. Yeah, here's where, exactly. Nope, we're going to shift you over because, right-of-way control.
There's fines and sanctions if you're not following it correctly. I mean, they're doing 4 or 5 different things all together as one real package to help drive, but they've published 2017 till now 50% reduction in damages.
That's a collaboration.
Yeah.
Takes that high level.
City of Fort Lauderdale is doing something very similar, where you've got to do, in order to even get a permit, you've got to do a full utility investigation of the path in which you want to install a utility before you can even get access to that permit.
Yeah, I think it's great to show like the successes and how the steps they can take to get those successes, and then the 811 centers can help to bring that across to everyone and coordinate that spot. And I think we talked last year about how to get everyone to share their data and everything bring together, and it starts, the one thing they mentioned was relationship building. Even the UCCs, now Steve over there, the guy installing it, and Doug over there, the guys that designing it, and then maybe they have a beer together. And next thing you know, they get to just share phone numbers, and now if they have a question, maybe things happen a little bit more in real time. So I think it's great.
So recently on Freakonomics, there was an episode on airline safety in the U.S. and how we got so safe. So today, not to be morbid, but you are more likely to die driving to the airport, than on a domestic airline flight. And one of the key reasons for how we got so safe is the sharing of safety data between the airlines and between the airlines and the FAA. So if we're in the damage prevention industry, if we're in the broader safety industry, why do we share so little data here in this industry that
How many airline
hinders us from
companies?
getting to, anywhere close to what the airline safety record is?
Yeah, one of the problems is just the number of airline companies versus the number of utilities across the country. It just brings up new challenges, right? It's like if you're having a Google Meet and there's 5 of you, or you bring 1,000 of you, now you need more screen space. And it gets harder, right? And so that's just the one comparison there that makes it why it's not there, but we need to head that direction for sure.
So what are some steps we can do? Well, let me put it this way. So is sharing a 4-letter word? Is it a bad word? What I mean is, if Forrest has something of value and Shane doesn't have it but wants it, and I go to Forrest and say, hey, Forrest, why don't you share this with Shane? Right? Forrest is not going to be that happy to share it with Shane. But if I go to Forrest and say, hey, why don't you rent this or sell this to Shane, he's going to be more open to it. So are we too afraid to allow entities, the stakeholders in this industry to monetize data? And those who have the data, instead of saying share it, I'm not going to share it, I have it, you don't. Like, why am I sharing it? Right? Say, hey, what if I can help you monetize the data you have, the asset that you have, like you monetize almost everything else in your life? Is that part of a problem is that part of a barrier in this industry of called sharing data?
I mean, so I'm a small business owner, and when I think of, when you talk about monetizing something that I'm already doing, finding another way to make some revenue off of actions that I'm already performing, then I'm a capitalist. I love the idea of working and making money and making a profit. So if you can show me a way to be able to increase profits, then yeah, I'm all for that. That sounds great. I don't think the barrier. I think that just about any small business owner, which most, I come at all these topics as a private utility locator, and it's very small. GPRS is a private utility locator, huge. You guys have huge resources, the largest around, and I'm on the other end of that, private utility locator with tiny resources and very small footprint, but still doing the same thing. But I see this as as ways to make money, and I think most private utility locators would say the same thing, that, oh, yeah, of course we want to increase profits. The difficulty, I think, one difficulty comes from just not really having a clear way forward. It's really easy to duplicate private utility locating or any other kind of GPR or WAND work because that model already exists, but there's not a very obvious model to follow when it comes to selling the data that you're already collecting and just making more money off of that. Are there ways to do it? Yeah, I can think of a couple ways to do that, but I think that our biggest hurdle right in front of us, there may be bigger down the road, but the one right in front of us is this isn't really happening in a way that's duplicatable to other, like across the board.
Yeah, I think there is 3 main reasons why people are not sharing data. The first one, they will speak about probably privacy issues. The second one, and I will tap into every one of them. The second one is competition reasons. And the third one, they don't really know where their facilities are based or located.
Right.
And I would say most of it will be for the third one. Nobody has, the location. Nobody has the physical existence of their facilities on an accurate manner that he could share, he's willing to share, and he doesn't want anybody to know that. And then I will go to competition. I think you should ask yourself if you're really protected, because on a data accessibility that you have today, like 8 years my son could, with his like drone, could give you anything with just going and tap into a couple of screens and using his drone and mobile phone. He will give you the network of the power line in my neighborhood, even before me. And the last one is, I think, is kind of the privacy issues and all kind of HLS manners. And I will ask this: when in the last 50 years you have seen like attack, a real physical attack on the US infrastructure, on the subsurface infrastructure?
Okay.
Yeah, you couldn't find that. How many strikes we have? We have to share data, but data again, it's because of the amount of data that is being produced each day. People are putting more and more utilities into the ground, and nobody's recording it, nobody's capturing it. But producing like the blueprints and the geoserver. They have like 80 people on their GIS for the biggest utility owners. They have like huge GIS system, but they don't have the ability to deal with blueprints, with geoservers. How can you conflate these different types of sources into one baseline? We don't have that baseline. We don't have that standard.
Yeah.
And we need to agree that this is the baseline. And now we need to incentivize people to share the data to that baseline. The question is when and where we're going to have, and we're going to agree that this is the baseline. I think that's the real question we are dealing with.
Talking about, getting, some money or something back for your data. I know some call centers, they have to buy their data that they put into the map, say the aerial imagery that they have. They're not going out and capturing that, and sometimes Google's not enough for them. They need a little bit more, and they'll spend upwards of 150, 200,000 just for an annual subscription to a layer of aerial imagery to make sure that the coordinates that are being drawn are very specific. And I think that's, A1 does serve a big purpose in that, about bringing them together, because we have a lot of differences across stakeholders, like a gas company, National Grid, and I think there's a couple of Shell publicly publish all their gas maps, right? Because they want people to know. But if I'm a fiber company, sometimes, it's hard to have multiple gas, companies service your home or so forth, but you can easily switch a fiber telecom, and that makes that whole environment a little bit different on the fiber side versus the gas side. And also when we get into, danger of that damage actually happening and so forth. So it'd be cool to see someone talk about, hey, for the amount of data that you provide, because it does have, a pretty linear benefit to the call center. I heard someone talking about abandoned infrastructure out there, and that's a whole map that no one has to provide to the 811 centers. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't go after it and try to bring that in to help excavators out when it comes to doing those damages. There is a lot of damages out there, and even, I think I mentioned it before with legislation, right? People are gonna do their business moves and do things the business way, and I think we need 811 and some associations to help push us towards those standards and possibly like monetizing the people that are bringing in good data. I think we're almost at a point now where it might be valuable for some companies to go out and just map a whole utilities system without even getting $1 and then make the money off of that later on. I think we're almost getting to that point with someone like, similar to 4M Analytics, and we want to tell you a good story and keep you safe, whether, make sure you have access to that information. So I think it'd be cool for someone to look at how to monetize the best data collectors. And then the excavator side, they got to get in the ball game too. If they go out and do a work order too, and they might not have all the GPS gear, but we need to be able to put some sketches to a map to say, hey, I did something here. Someone please come out and check this later, because I know in some call centers they're having the problem with new infrastructure. As you extend the life of your locate, with 20 days, we talk about 24 hours or 48 hours. But what if I have, the life of that locate is only about 22 days in some states, but some places it's 90 days. Sometimes it's the life of the project. So you're reducing the amount of times you got to go out. You're putting more onus on the excavator, but now you have a new challenge where did anything get installed in that area, right? So we need the excavators to jump in and take part of this, not just them having to go out and do their job and be like, oh, I feel risky, now I'll call a private locator, do stuff. They need to be proactive in a big part of this. They're a major stakeholder too, and the data is valuable to them as well.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a little bit of a concern about new players coming in and monetizing off data that may relate back to a utility owner that they're not affiliated to, or a risk algorithm related to ticketing systems, and what is the most risky ticket in this area that we supply more resources to, and what if it's wrong? So there's a legislation thing here where, hey, I'm doing exactly what's legislated, and these folks might have some good ideas, and maybe I'm a little afraid of them monetizing, maybe not. But if I start to do things that are outside of what's legislated or beyond what's legislated, I'm putting myself at risk a little bit too. And so there can be some concern that, hey, if I go too far outside of status quo, I may be putting, our 811 center at risk, or our business at risk if it's somebody else, for trying something a little bit new. This is an 800-pound gorilla running through a china shop, and if you start trying some new things, you may get run over. So we're starting to see a little bit of that. I think the industry sees the technology coming and knows that there's going to be data that can help solve some of these problems. It's just figuring out, okay, how do we work it into the existing system, or what can we change in the existing system to adopt new practices that help us reduce some of these damages. And it's going to take some pioneers to get us there.
Oh, it does.
It's
Drag some people.
It's always the risk.
Dragging.
The first penguin in the water is always the biggest risk, right? But I think once somebody jumps in and everybody starts finding a solution that works, you'll start to see a lot more data sharing, a lot more information flow back and forth.
Yeah, and we have to connect between the states of what we're planning, what we're designing, and what we actually implemented in the ground. Because if we cannot connect the dots and we're going to get like different deliverables, eventually we're going to produce more S-builds, which will be like immediately WAS builds, wish builds. So we have to agree, and this standard, I don't know if you're familiar with, that's the first time that somebody actually draw the line, the standard of the guidelines for recording and exchanging utility infrastructure data. This is a standard, that's 7522. That's the new as installed. So we have to agree, this is the standard, okay, that's the first one we have, let's use it. So everyone could produce the data on the same characteristics with the same attributes. If we're going to talk about accuracy, it's subjective. Let's agree on what is accuracy means. If we're talking about size, diameter, position, depth, sector, subsector, material, let's agree on those attributes. Let's agree on the places we're going to go to do the search, to use. What are the tools that we're going to do for, I think it needs to be hybrid. To your point, I'm not saying that data will come, and data analytics will change everything. It needs to be people, humans, but with data, with analytics, with AI engine that could provide you the kickoff on one hand and to reduce the time spent on the field. Let's take the hours and let's reduce a year out of the construction value chain. Let's create like a real impact to the contingency, the traffic contingency. We here, every one of us, even the companies, the private companies, but mostly those, call centers and the utility owners to provide value to the public, to the people. And I think we could also work with the people and, building communities of, they could capture for us manholes, poles, hydrants, all kind of objects that eventually they've been tackling every day. So we could just incentivize them to do that, just to get the feedback loops, because data, if I'm going to give you like a full, accuracy and everything you could dream of, and I will say to you, this is the map of the US. The day after, without the infrastructure and the foundations to retain the data, to keep it up to date and ready to use, and without people using it and creating the new deliverables that just they've been installed in the ground, it will be the same deviation of S-builds go into WISH and WAS builds. And that's the problem. That's why we have those systems fragmented. And going back to the beginning, lack of data, repeat work. Why do we have to send the people again if we just 14 days ago, we just produced the data? Why do we have to do the same process again? Let's use the data that have been captured to guide the locator or to guide the excavator. And if the job hasn't been started, why do we have to send people again? It's like I spoke earlier with with Chris and also with Jimmy about the system today is abusing by pranks. It's like fire station that goes after pranks. They're pranking the system. And eventually, there's like a guy that locked with his whole family in a floor 36, and there is no tracks, available to send him. And he's gonna die. That's the system today. The system has been abused every day because of the reuse of the same processes that needs to be.
And like if you have good data, you can extend that life of it. So hey, now in 90 days. So if you don't start, and then hey, on the other side, if I know when stuff's getting built in your area, I can alert you, okay? So you can still check, but maybe I don't need to send people out there, right? We can do a little bit thing of informing the excavator about what's going on. And one of the keys also to this is using APIs to connect data. This, I don't know if, from my experience, you talk to some utilities and they're all big on Esri, but you talk about, okay, well, I don't want you to send me your Esri manually once a month. I want it directly connected so that your employees see the same thing that I'm seeing. And I know one of our big customers does a utility where they have other departments in that same utility that doesn't understand how the locate company has it set up like this, because they see it in real time. And it's kind of funny because even if it goes down, the utility fixes it back up because they're usually doing some maintenance to it. So it's a nice loop. And we need those APIs so that we can talk, that data can move faster. Humans, we're prone to errors. We're not great communicators. But if we can push stuff over to where it needs to go, like even having a polygon at the call center, maybe we could have some more information over there and directly connect into the utilities information. So I don't have to resend you. I think I saw on a slide, that every Tuesday, Friday, there's still 3 days stale. And there's still some manual work for a utility to load up some of their data to an 811 center. When the technology is there to just sending it over in real time and put it on the utility to force how it's organized. And then that way, if you have those APIs, a lot of the times I've already done a lot of work on my project. I know what I'm going to be doing from the engineering side and the planning phase. I get it all here, and now I have to take this information and go manually type in a separate system about here's what I'm doing, there's prone for human error there, and it actually takes me out of that end-to-end process. And now I have to take that data back and connect it all myself back. And that's kind of what's nice to look at Chicago is how they're connecting those phases out there, or those whole processes together, and really using APIs, and what's mapping is REST APIs that are kind of sitting there waiting. But that really helps to push the information out there. And I'd like to see the call centers really get behind that, as well as the utilities, trying to save them some manual work of having to manually do it, and then you have this stale data here, this stale data here, and we need to keep it all kind of real time so that, if I'm digging and I'm trying to save down from 72 hours to 24 hours in time, I need quickness information. Even if someone did something wrong or have anything, I need to know when there's been something in that area and really connect to all the systems, because a lot of utilities have different systems as well, from how they manage their work and design as well. So I think that there's a big kind of technical learning curve for people, and I mentioned blockchain earlier, and this is kind of all sets down there, and we're on the path to get to all this stuff here, and it's going to be really nice once we get there, but dang, it's going to take a long time.
What do you think about changing the name of call center to data center?
It makes sense to me. Like that's, 811 data center. They're managing it there, and then, you need someone. You can't have one utility tell another utility how things should go. You definitely need a referee in the room, and that's what 811 does a good job. There's definitely a need for someone in there to make everyone play nice. And then I know we talked about Chicago again. Fees and fines. People don't like that stuff, but it's one of the only ways to deviate behavior in some of these industries, in our industry specifically, to get an excavator. And it's hard too, because sometimes a small, excavator can make a new company. Startup was another one. So it's a game to really try to know who's digging in your area, and that's why when you see at the city level, like Chicago, they got a bit of a hand on it. And looking at the statewide level, it's not the same. It's a bit of a different animal, if you're looking at Southern Illinois versus Chicago especially.
So I'm going to tie in what three of you have said about data and then human error. It seems to me that part of the barrier to change, to improvement in this industry is that we're too unforgiving of data and data analysis imperfections and too forgiving of human error. What I mean is, it's similar to what we see with autonomous cars, in that people are like, oh, this autonomous car caused this accident and killed one person, and that's horrible. And I have to remind people, humans kill about 50,000 humans every year. in human-driven cars. So if autonomous cars, let's say, for example, killed 30,000 people a year, and we all went to autonomous cars, did autonomous cars kill 30,000 or did it save 20,000 people? Right, and so the question is, like, the data analysis, it's not gonna be perfect, nothing's perfect, right? Are we too unforgiving of imperfection and too scared of imperfection, and we're clinging on to human errors, and because we're forgiving of human errors, we're all human, and that prevents some progress in this industry.
There's another thing there to add is, I don't want to be in the driverless car and be the first one to find that bug. You know, things take time, and like in any time when you release something new, it takes time to get ironed out, and they're still ironed out. And I'd be all for a driverless car, but I ain't getting in the first one. You know, it takes some time to go there because you're going to learn through those areas. And so, yeah, it might save us overall, but sometimes it's tough for myself to be like, I still feel in control if I'm at the wheel. And it's really hard for us to let go, but as we keep refining our systems and building the things out, the information, they'll have no choice but to be able to trust it, and it'll be a better driver than that actual human is, and the ratios should get down to that person as well, because we're not all the same drivers out there. That's the one thing. I look out there, there's like, you know, 80% of the people drive. It might be great to have a driverless car, but there's still a top end of people or something like that that feel out of control when something's new. So sometimes it just takes time for us to get there. And like even in there, I was talking about with the locates, with this too many to repeat, it's very problematic when I'm spending all this time doing different work instead of refining the system more. Like some locate companies, the utilities can't even pay the locate company enough to do map corrections when they're out there because they got too many locates to do. And that's where they're working for today instead of for tomorrow, right? And that's important with some of the new technologies to make sure that, hey, they refine themselves because they're coming and they are smart, you know.
So, you know, we hear all the time, we don't have enough locators, we don't have enough of this kind of profession, we don't have enough of that. How can we, what are the next steps? I don't mean like theoretically, but what are the next steps the industry should look at to truly lever data, the data that's been collected, the data that already exists, and data analysis to augment the current headcount instead of just adding more headcount every year, adding more and more headcount that we don't know where that's coming from. What are some concrete next steps we should take?
I think we should remember that the user to the system that we're all part of is the excavator. Mm-hmm. He's been forgotten. And I think somebody, you know, forgot that the systems exist to provide him access to a safe dig. That's the first one. The second one, I think, because you don't have enough locators, and if you look at it, like 5 years from today, mothers are still not convinced to make locators. Sorry to say that. So you won't be able to find locators. So something has to change. And I think you should also promote the locating in a better way that people would want to come to be part of that system, but to go out every night on a slot of 5-6 hours on a highway, that's a unique job. So, and you have to find the unique people, but give the people tools to be more efficient and more protected. And I think it will be a combination. It will be like something hybrid between the data that could be, you know, on the hands of the locator, the excavators, the call centers, the utility owners. And we have to agree, that's the language. That's the channel we're going to speak on. And we're going to start do like collaboration. There is a word that we should all remember, coordination and risk mitigation with simulation even before sending people to the field. We need to send people to the field only to the areas that we believe that are most risky. And I think that's the means of manage the risk. Because if I'm going to draw a line It's about, you asked before, it's about how many winners we're going to have or fewer losers. So it's infinite scenarios of risk. We have to take responsibility. We have to use our fiduciary to manage that risk and to send the people to the places they need to be.
And I think that might be how it starts. If it's, say, I'm, 811, the data center, and someone calls me and I have something extremely low risk, I can probably save everyone some time. And some utilities do this right now. Hey, if you hit these rules, but a lot of these rules are text-based. They don't look, hey, you're landscaping, or you're doing some gardening over here. But, they also want to say, but, hey, there's a high profile nearby, just in case, right? And sometimes there's not a high profile in that gardening area. Most of the times it's not. But definitely that risk assessment while looking at the data, because that's sometimes the best predictor of the risk assessment, is your mapping data and what's out there and your attributes to, hey, how long ago was that done? How long ago was that located? I know in our system we do tagging. So if a locate comes in, it can check to see, it'll tag it. Was it recently mapped? Was it recently located? Is mapping required? And then it's speeding up the times that it tell the locations about what is actually required for that job. I know outside of the US, in Ontario, Canada, they're starting to share locates. There's so many locates in that area that they get 2 weeks behind, and everyone's up in arms. So now they've opened up kind of dedicated locates where you might have multiple. You don't just have one contract locator anymore. The call center will force you to share your data with multiple locating vendors, as well as they're bringing fines and some other stuff like that. And then what they're, I forgot what I was going to say there about the X-rays, but just serving up, becoming a little bit more of a piece, the shared locates. So now I have these dig coordinates about where exactly the dig was happening. Now any other locate can come in and say, hey, this was recently located 10 days ago and nothing new was put in there, right? And that's just data. It's just data, querying what's in there, as well as the work history, as well as what's happening, or who was there, who was the locator, was that guy certified that, went and did that as well, and the call center can check that. And then if we're doing risk scores, you can start on the lower risk ones to start to automate and chisel away at some automations in there so that we can save some locators, because a lot of times software is just for you to make more critical, better decisions. It doesn't take your job, it just stops you from wasting your time in the mundane work. It takes all your decisions that you spend your time doing for your company and brings them to a higher level so that you can make a bigger impact. And that exactly would save some locators if we could spend some more time on doing the data and have better mapping and have better processing, ticket management systems that look not just serving business, but really guiding to, hey, bring differences to the industry with the data and how you use it. With Planet Underground, we were at the Louisville Expo I mentioned. I showed how we brought in multiple mapping companies into one platform, and then I showed, hey, this is how we're gonna use it. And you can see the quality D from the quality A and someone getting some different stuff. And sometimes even if it's not perfect, you still want that data, right? And that's where AI can come in down the road for us here. It's gonna be little pieces of it, but AI can come in and tell you, hey, I have 4 people that mapped it right here and 1 that mapped it here. Probably not gonna trust this guy. And it'll also be able to tell you, hey, these 4 guys are following some old paint marks out there, and kind of look over here. And that's what we need, is a lot more smarts and intelligence, because this industry has so much data. It has so many stakeholders. It's like no other. There's more work orders than anyone can get done. Look at a service industry, and they'll hire enough people to go do every one of those jobs. They'll make sure, because the profits are enough on there, but they get put in these tough spots that, they have to kind of miss some few, or they have to do a lot of rescheduling, and then you become, hey, I'm locator and a rescheduler. So it's pretty interesting looking at how the share locates and see some of the changes out there.
You said, Shane, this industry has a lot of data. Does this industry have too much data and not enough analysis, or not enough data and to do analysis with? I mean, to all of you, not just Shane.
I think it's not enough data. I think it still needs more to make confidence in decisions. There's always a kind of asterisk in the back of your mind. We're like, are we sure? And with anything, you might use a software program and say you get a few bugs, but your confidence starts to drop.
So sorry, is it not enough data or not enough good data?
It's not enough data. There needs to be a lot more. There's a lot of stuff underground out there, and a lot of people have a lot of that data. There needs to be more sharing of the data. So more access to the data, because I think a lot of it's out there. But if people have more access to the data, then computer systems can do more with it. And if we bring that into, where maybe it's more beyond polygons at the 811 center, we can start checking the attribute tables and say, hey, this main's been there since 100 years. And maybe your 811 center can recommend, hey, infrastructure replacement for you because they know your data as well. And they can compare your data across other utilities that do the same stuff. And once you're doing that, like if you're checking your own GIS data, it's only you, right? It's only going to tell your stories. But if everyone puts all their GIS in one spot, and then you'll be able to tell stories about the whole collection of data. And I don't know the last time Gmail deleted anything of mine, for sure. So like deleting stuff isn't really a thing in the technology anymore. They want to store everything they can and make sure they have it. And I think right now there's enough data out there. You got to get the access to it, bring it all together, whether it's APIs and sharing and being a leader. Sometimes everyone can kind of hang back with, like Shell and National Grid. That's a great job of them being a leader because it makes sense. And it gives another avenues for access to there because maybe, hey, I'm safe to dig, but maybe that one is a really sensitive piece of infrastructure.
Anyone else have any thoughts about too much data or?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of data out there, but when I think of quality of data is probably what matters most. So I think in some areas we've got good, some areas we've got probably great data, and some areas we've got really poor data. So if I'm looking at the DIRT, you referenced the DIRT report earlier. One of the root causes of damages right now is that no ticket was called in, right? So I hear that and I say, okay, 24% no ticket. Is that the root cause of the damage or is that the direct cause in that moment? For me, it's, okay, I want to dive into what to me is the root cause. Why did they not call in a ticket? Is it that they didn't know? Is this an education concern? Or did they know they just don't have faith in the system? And so that's a whole different type of root cause scenarios we could dive into. And so I think spending time in some of these areas where really dissecting the data and understanding what it actually means is when you can start to solve some of the challenges. So that's an area where I'd say we could do more with getting better or more information related to the data we do have. But then there are other areas where we just don't have data or folks are reluctant to collect data. So existing utility infrastructure is either, in some cases, unknown, where we've purposefully not kept track of where our legacy utilities are at because then we feel like we're responsible for them, so they're abandoned in place. And so we've lost track of that information. That's still really important. If I'm an excavator, I still need to know where that is at to prevent a damage, correct? It's a risk to my team. It may not be a risk to utility owner anymore. But if I got a guy in the bucket or down in a spotter next to the hole, that could be a risk for our guys.
He's supposed to assume it's live, too, until he knows otherwise.
So there's a lot of ways we can collect more data in that space. And then the point you mentioned about sharing. There are a lot of folks that do have really good data, but they want to hold on to it for their own use and their protection. And we got to get more comfortable sharing. That doesn't mean giving, but temporarily maybe sharing information that you own for other folks to use to prevent damages.
I think we have more data more than we're capable to deal with, because we have multiple pipelines of sources that produces data every day, but we don't have like one pipeline that centralizes everything into a baseline, as I mentioned. And to your point about the DIRT report, 24% of no notification have been made. I will say to you that I think it relates, and we have data to support that, to the system, to the fragmented system. I think those are not criminals that decided to just wake up, go with a backhoe, and just dig somewhere. No, those are the ones that submitted the ticket. Either the proximity was there, but either earlier than expected, and they dig it, they dig afterwards, or at the end, and they didn't resubmit the tickets. So I will assume more than 80% of the 24% will go, to the way the system has been designed, and hasn't been changed from the moment that we designed it. So yes, I think we need to build to be able to deal with data, and you could see the other companies I mentioned before. You have to have infrastructure. You have to have the mental model of, the retention, the collection, and then you have the shareability. But if to get to a baseline, you have to have to have the acceptance of utility owners, you're talking about, thousands of parties that needs to agree to something. No, you have to get the baseline without any participation and to prove to everyone that you know about the location and attributes of his facilities, I will say better than him. And then he will say, if that's the case, I'm willing to give you the data to compare what I missed. So now you have a starting point for a functional conversation. And I think we need to look at permitting, not just on utility data, because coordination it's about, in my vision, cities, municipalities, federal agencies, even the DOTs, all needs to come together into something that if we're using 811 system as the crystal ball of future, we are not using yet, but it may be the crystal ball of future development and future resilience. I think we could work together just to see like the city submitting, enabling to get permit, and the 811 could see like the water system and the electricity system, the intention of, implementing something or do all kind of ongoing maintenance activities at the same month. So let's make them do it on the same day. Because we know it's the same month. Why to coordinate and to block the traffic for a whole month? Let's create a path to traffic contingency reduction and value to the public. But that needs to be like a coordination and collaboration between the cities, the counties, the excavators, the 811s, the utility owners, the locators. Everyone needs to come to the forefront and say, we're going to play in that game. And those are the rules. We need to agree on the rules. That's, I think, what will start functional conversation that will make it different.
Yeah, so Itzik and Shane brought up the point that I think is really interesting, which is the more we leverage this data, and the more that analysis is used, it should increase the wages of these workers, right? If you think about it, the backhoe operator makes more than the guy with the shovel, and the guy with the shovel makes more than the guy who's digging with his hands, right? So shouldn't we look at technology and this data analysis as just tools that help add value to people, to the workers, instead of taking value away from them?
Well, one of the things I like is when I see an 811 center include multiple stakeholders as part of their members. I think it's in Michigan where you can sign up as a locator to the actual 811, and what it does is just it brings you into the fold a little bit there, where they want the data to know as not just who has map data, but what people are bought into it. If I'm one guy and I'm changing a new company and I keep making damages, hopefully someone gets his name and so forth. And it's a little bit harder to go change your personal name, and say, hey, now I've legally changed my name and I'm someone else. But I thought it's really interesting to kind of make people feel accepted into there. Like I said, I think there's 29 or something stakeholders. That's a lot. And when I say only utilities can talk to us, I think the 811 centers can look at bringing on, hey, are we a private locator? Is this a public locator? And at some point, your 811 might try to find you someone that is available to do the mapping, kind of like Uber, but kind of for mapping, so we can go kind of plug that mapping gap. So I think including people in there as a part of it is some way to kind of churn them, and then also incentivize them. If you become a mapper, and you're doing a little bit more benefit and you save some locates, well, you as a locator may be doing the job of two now. And hopefully that can create, well, I'm not just a locator going down there to put paint. I'm a guy that knows, hey, technology, I know GPS, I know GIS. Like, this is a skilled worker. If I'm a private locator, some of these private locators are amazing. Like, you guys are amazing at how well you guys can go out there and break a site down and use GPR and cross-reference that data. And a lot of public locators' dreams is to be that private locator. And so when you can improve the job description, I think that'll improve maybe bringing more people in there. And also, if we have more data, should be able to trim some of the needs in there, but I think it's a great thing for the industry. I don't know if the locator goes away completely or just changes his name to a map verifier.
Well, and we were talking about, we're talking about the difference between or the examples brought up the difference between a guy with a shovel and a guy in an excavator, and one is paid a lot more than the other. And there's a huge difference in training and years put into learning how to run an excavator. And this, I think that a major component to to reducing damages is, again, I see this from my perspective, which is the damages that I become associated with are usually a result of somebody either not calling in a locate or a locate being done poorly. It's a complicated thing. There are many more aspects to it, but what I usually see usually fall into one of those two categories. Somebody was lazy and didn't call it in, or it was marked, the gas line was marked here, the gas line is actually 5 feet that way. And if there are a number of different things you could do to try to educate and make sure people are actually calling in and getting a locate, private or public, done. But in terms of making sure that locates are done accurately, I see that as a huge reason why damages happen, because everything, even if you cross all your T's and dot all your I's, if the paint mark on the ground or the map or the flags are inaccurate, then it doesn't matter how diligent you are if you're going off of erroneous data. And to that point, the training put into getting the analogy of the shovel guy, the shovel laborer to the excavator, getting a guy who's very basically trained to a higher level of competence, that takes training, and that takes time, and that takes money, and all these things are just kick against the status quo. I mean, the 811 system with these public locates, I mean, these guys have to go out and they locate 20 or 30 tickets in a day. And I know there are fewer and there are more, but most of the public locators I've talked to, they're usually locating somewhere around 20 or 30 tickets or so or plus a day. And that's a lot. And that's going out there, and if I was paying my employees I was giving them a salary, and I said, you've got to just do 30 of these things a day, then I cannot expect them to do a great job as well on the 30 tickets as they would if I told them, you've got 3 jobs to do today, and you do those 3 jobs very thoroughly. There's just no way to expect a human to do as well on 3 or 4 jobs as you would on 30. And so I think there's a lot of, my unpopular opinion is that there are a lot of problems with the way that we're doing the 811 system, where we're incentivizing public locators to do a job quick and sloppy, because if they don't, then they have to take on whatever they didn't do today, whatever they didn't finish today, they've got to do tomorrow. So tomorrow's going to be even worse. And the training that goes into it, the tools that they have available to them, I think that the guys are, by and large, they're the guys who are using the shovel instead of the excavator, and those guys are, there are many guys who are 811, I'm not talking about their competency at all, I'm just talking about what they're asked to do. They're asked to do a lot in the same number of hours that we all have, and that's going to contribute to problems in terms of accuracy of locates and quality of locates.
Yeah, I'm sorry. On that note, I think that's what Itzik was talking about, like the unnecessary runs if you're a fire truck, right? And I think we agree with that. On that note, we'll have to end it. We're kind of going past our time. Can we get a quick hand for our fine panelists here live? Thank you. And that, I believe, concludes just today. Roundtables, we're back here tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central Time for a great topic, the future of 811 centers. So please join us. live here and on the live stream. Thank you, everyone.